Welcome to the Mama Bear Family Care Mastermind Summit. I'm Sherilyn and I'll be hosting the summit. Today we'll be talking to Jan Allegretti, who is trained in veterinary homeopathy and has more than 30 years experience as a consultant in holistic healthcare for non-human animals and more than 35 years as an advocate for compassionate care for all species. She is an author. Her latest book is The Fresh and Flexible Meal Plan, the easiest, most nutritious way to feed your dog and cat. Her other books are The Complete Holistic Dog Book, Home Health Care for Our Canine Companions, and Listen to the Silence, Lessons from Trees and Other Masters. We're definitely going to get into diet a lot more in a minute because your latest book is about how to feed them. And there's some really amazing information in there. The first question I want to ask you about that is you talk about feeding our companion animals as part of our family. So, and you talk about how that can change our relationship with them too, in a similar way to calling them companions instead of pets, or thinking of ourselves as their owners. How does feeding them as part of our family? What are the benefits to that for them and for us?
It's actually something that I discovered almost by accident. I quite some time ago began to feed my own dogs like I feed myself, rather than and it came to, well, it actually started with a cat who had severe allergies. But as you say, we can talk more about the details of that in a bit. But basically, the idea is that all species benefit from the same kinds of good feeding principles that you and I do, Cheryl. That we know now that we do best when we eat fresh, whole foods, minimally processed, with lots and lots of variety. We're supposed to eat different vegetables. So you've probably, I think most people have heard the term eat the colors of the rainbow now. Purple foods, red, orange, green, lots of greens, all different colored foods. And our dogs and cats do well the same way, and I have found that I remember when I first started to do this, I just had a lot of joy from preparing a meal of fresh, good, healthy food and sharing it with my cat or my dog. And then they loved it and they enjoyed it. And that felt good. It's just like when you make a nice meal for your child and you put a lot of love into choosing what would they like today, which vegetable haven't they had in a while. And there's a whole ritual that you develop around that. And then they get to where they hear you in the kitchen and they start to wonder what's going on in the kitchen. And they know it's not going to, it's going to take a little while, right? Because you have to prepare something. So they sit there and they wait. A whole relationship, is affected. And then, and so I have found that feeding that way, it brings a different element to the relationship than opening a bag of dog food or cat food and scooping out a cup of kibble and putting in the bowl. That's, we have many people do that with very good reason, because it's what we have been taught is the right and best thing to do. And there are a lot of reasons why we come to that, but it misses the value of good fresh food. And so when we bring that value back into it, and then we bring in the component of sharing our own meals, which is perfectly fine to do with some limitations that we can talk about later, but that's a wonderful way to do it. It just changes the relationship. I remember I was really struck by this the first time that I had been feeding an animal this way for some time, feeding a dog this way for some time. And after she passed, I went to the grocery store and I walked around the grocery store and I didn't have to shop for her. And I was really sad because I realized how much enjoyment I had gotten from going to the store and picking out what she would enjoy or what she needed or how we would prepare it for, and thinking about those things. So it's a way of bringing them into our own circle. Whereas we were talking before about owner versus caregiver or guardian, and pet versus companion. This is another way of shifting the relationship from other species as being different from us or lesser than us. You know, we need good, fresh, healthy food, unprocessed food, but it's okay for our dogs or cats to eat kibble out of a bag, same thing every day, you know. And so, and again, I don't mean to be judged. I say that that's anybody's bad for doing that, because I know I for many years did that because I thought it was the best thing. But when we make that one shift, it's just a very tangible, everyday way of saying, you're more like me than you are different from me. And you and I can figuratively and literally sit at the same table and share the same meal, like two companions and two equal members of the same family, which is really ultimately what we are, you know.
Yes.
And
That's
so
so
if I can
powerful.
bring that into your everyday life, it's beautiful. It's really powerful. And I hear this
Wow.
too from my clients who have done this independently without even me even mentioning to it again and again. I have people say, you know, I started feeding this way because he was sick and I wanted him to feel better, but it's changed my relationship with him for a lot of reasons.
Wow. That's so profound.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're treating them with more respect
Yeah,
as equals as far as being alive here on the earth together.
right.
A
And
lot of okay.
I don't want to suggest that people who feed packaged food are not respectful, because I know
Right.
when most of them is certainly your community that you're sharing this with. They're here because they are people who are respectful. But
Oh
again,
yes.
we've been taught to do something that, you know, as I say, we're all evolving, right? As I said from the
Yes.
beginning, I certainly am. And so I think this is a really important step in that evolution of each of us as individuals. And I hope culturally that we can begin to shift the way we think about other species, just like as I hope that by using different language, we can shift our thinking about the relationship. I think now too, by changing the way we feed is another way, another vehicle for helping us to shift the way we think about who they are, who we are as companions in this planet, you know?
Yes. Yes, that makes me think of some indigenous traditions
Mhm.
of how they think of animals as our relatives,
Right,
literally our relatives.
right, right. Brother, sister. That's right.
Yeah.
It's
And
very
it's
much the
quite
same.
different. Yeah.
Very much the same.
Yes. Yes. And that's quite different than the culture we've sort of grown up in, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
How can how can we make sure that they get adequate nutrition when we're not used to feeding them this way and we're used to relying on pre-measured food that, you know, has certain nutrients that we don't have to think about? How that seems a little like it could be a little bit intimidating, you know, to make sure that we got all their bases covered.
That's a really good question, because it's actually one of the biggest things people express to me when I suggest they feed this way, one of the biggest concerns they have. And the key, I mean, there are a few keys. The first of all, you're going to be feeding fresh foods. There are very, very few foods you can count on one hand or less, which depending on who you're feeding, that you want to avoid. But um, the key is to feed fresh whole foods, minimal processing. You know, if you're eating Twinkies and ho-hos yourself, then that's not what you want to share with your dog or cat, obviously. But if you're feeding fresh plants, fruits and vegetables, and whole grains and so on, you're feeding those. But a big part of it is variety. To me, that is the single most important ingredient in any fresh food diet for whoever is eating, whether it's for my meals or yours, or for our dogs and cats and horses and other species. Variety is the best insurance, because we've been led to believe, and we have trusted, and with some success, but not across the board, that when we buy a packaged food that's labeled 100% nutritionally complete, okay, I know my dog's going to get or my cat's going to get exactly what they need. However, to my mind, there's no such thing as 100% nutritionally complete, because for one thing, each one of us is different. We all have different nutritional needs. Our bodies are all different. We have different activity levels from one day or week to the next. We're all aged, so needs change. We may encounter a health problem that's going to change the the nutrients that we need to heal. And so there's no way for even the best intentioned dog food or cat food company to create a food that is 100% nutritionally complete for your dog or for your cat every day for the next weeks or months or years or however long you're going to feed that food. And even they're basing it on the science that we have available now, which is sorely lacking. You and I both know that whatever we think, whether it's a human or another species, and we're far better off, we know a lot more about human nutrition than any other species. But even for humans, we think we know what we need now, but next week or 2 or 3 weeks after that, there's going to be a new study that's going to come out and say, you know what we thought was true about human nutrition is not true. We're wrong. There's a new study that came out that demonstrated this whole new idea. And so to count on a packaged food that claims to be 100% nutritionally complete to provide everything your animal needs is a fallacy. We're far better off, just the way you and I eat, to feed a variety of foods, something different all the time. And so I may not get everything I need today. Your dog, your cat may not get everything he or she needs today in the meals that you feed today, but she's going to get something different tomorrow. So over the course of a few days or a week, we all get an opportunity to get whatever nutrients we need from a large variety of foods, so that our bodies can pick and choose from what's available coming through the digestive tract to get what we ultimately need. So it's that variety of foods that makes sure that they'll get everything they need over the period of time. And then as you begin to do this, you begin to watch for changes. If they seem to be losing weight, maybe you just need to feed more, or maybe you need to feed more protein or more carbohydrates, or increase the amount of fruits and vegetables, and you make modifications based on what they show you, so that you can over time develop an approach to feeding that works really well for them. But it starts with variety. A variety of foods is the biggest insurance that they'll get what they need.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So it's also, it sounds like approaching them as individuals the same way we do ourselves, and like, what right. a radical idea, right?
Right. It really is. I know. And it's, again, here we come back to the same point that, they bring as much unique individuality and unique presence to the conversation as any human does. I mean, if you have a big gathering of all your family members, everybody has different preferences. Some people do well on a high carb diet, some don't, some,
right.
Everybody has different needs, and it's the same with them. So yeah, you can tailor it to their needs, exactly what you say.
It was really mind-blowing when I first heard that a couple weeks ago for the first time from another interview of yours that I was listening to. And I kind of felt so dumb for not having ever thought of that before. Like, can you imagine if we all just went to the store and bought a bag of human food and had as many cups a day as we needed, solely based on weight, not based on any other needs we have? It seems ridiculous, but it's like our bodies are certainly not that different. I mean, to the point that sadly, animals are used in scientific studies to find out what would be good for humans. So we're very similar, right? So, and we're taught to eat variety to stay healthy. We're taught that it's dangerous to only eat the same thing every day, because we're going to end up with deficiencies. Exactly. And yet somehow there's a split there in the way we think of feeding animals.
Exactly. You're exactly right. Why is it that, people who are very health conscious and think a lot about making sure they eat the way we're talking about, with lots of variety and fresh, whole foods, minimally processed, and yet with every best intention to feed the very best possible diet to a dog or cat, they feed the most highly processed food available and the same thing every
Yeah.
day. You're exactly right. It
Yeah.
is a revelation, you know.
Yeah, it is. It's because I mean, I know for myself, like I just imagine if I'm eating canned food every day or packaged food, if everything I'm eating for a week comes out of cans and packages, it's I know like with canned food, it has a feeling of being suffocated to me. It
Yeah,
doesn't have that life-giving, like a can of
exactly.
green beans isn't the same. It's not,
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah.
I tell this story, and I included this in this last book about how when I was growing up, there was a breakfast cereal called Total. And
Hmm.
I'm sure you're much too young for that, but
I
do you
remember
remember
that.
that? Do you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they called it Total because it had 100% of every nutrient on the RDA list of
That's
nutritional
right.
requirements for people. And so, my mother would give my sister and me that for breakfast, and we'd have our Total. And so, okay, we're covered for the day, right?
Right.
Well, the way we feed our dogs and cats, it's like giving them Total breakfast cereal every breakfast and every dinner every day
Yeah.
for years. I mean, after a while, you just, oh my gosh, give me a nice salad. So yeah,
Yeah, right.
it's
Right.
it's what we're doing.
Yeah. Wow. It's so mind-blowing. And along those lines, another thing that has been a breakthrough for a lot of people is I know that I personally was really affected by the movie Forks Over Knives.
Hmm.
It's a documentary and it talks about the the health benefits of eating either less animal products or no animal products. It's not necessarily only talking about being vegan, because some of the examples that they used in the movie are a lot of the examples, in fact, are how these doctors noticed that first generation immigrants were a lot healthier than their children and their grandchildren. And they realized that it was because of what they were eating. And a lot of times, their main food was mostly plant based. They would have some meat sometimes, regardless of what countries they were from. A lot of times, the indigenous food would, or the traditional food for their cultures would be mostly plant based. Like, for example, Asian food with rice and vegetables, maybe a little bit of fish. Or there was a Chinese man in there talking about how he grew up where they would have lots of vegetables and some rice and maybe a little piece of meat divided up among the whole family in some soup or something. And how he was just shocked when he came to the United States and he'd, see these big old hunks of meat for, sometimes multiple meals a day. And he sadly developed heart problems after this change when he immigrated to the United States. And that's how he came into contact with this renowned cardiologist, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who has saved the lives of many people with very severe cardiovascular problems and other issues as well. I've heard you talk about this. For those people who are interested in exploring the idea of feeding our animals less meat or no meat, I know a lot of people approach it if they are leaning toward being vegetarian or vegan themselves for either health reasons or for environmental reasons or ethical reasons. They may want to make a shift like that for their animals, but be concerned about their animals getting the things that they need. And you talk about the difference between nutrients and ingredients. And you also, I heard you talk about how not only can is it possible for them to thrive with less meat or no meat, but a lot of times they will end up getting better. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it's true that they can thrive. They are not, first of all, our dogs are not wolves and our cats are not lions or tigers. They're very
Yeah.
different. They've been living with us for a very, very, very long time and they've adapted to our our diet. And so yes, they can do well with lots of fruits and vegetables and grains and beans and those kinds of foods. Um, and I want to mention that the reasons, all the reasons that people make those choices for themselves are true, probably to an even greater extent. They're valid to an even greater extent for dogs and cats. I was very surprised when I first learned this, that all the animal products consumed in the United States for food, all the food that comes from animals that's consumed in the United States, 25% of that goes to feed our dogs and cats.
Wow.
No, that's a huge component of it. So if a person is choosing to reduce their amount of meat consumption for environmental reasons, it's a big reason to recognize that making that kind of a transition for their dogs and cats is equally important, or if not more so. And part of that is because typically our dogs and cats, there's a much higher percentage of meat, of animal products in their diets than there typically is for most humans. So, that's part of the reason that the percentages are so skewed. But that also means that the health impacts are greater for them. If we're accustomed to, a dog or cat food that you buy at the store, or a lot of people feed the raw food diet, where it's based on fresh food, but it's all mostly raw meat. That higher percentage of animal products it has a greater health impact on them, it seems, than it does on us, because a greater percentage of the diet is based on animals. So, and there's a very, very specific reason. Well, there are probably a number of reasons for it. There's reason to think that our bodies don't process animal proteins in the same way that we process proteins that we get from plants. And that may be part of the reason for the kinds of information that you talked about from Dr. Esselstyn about how reducing the consumption of meat for humans reduces incidences of heart disease and cancer and diabetes and many, many other health problems. And so it seems to be that there's a similar effect in dogs and cats. Another reason for that is that it's about toxicity. And it is about, we live in such a toxic environment these days. You can read and lots of stories online about how there are industrial chemicals everywhere on our planet now. It's in our soil, it's in our water, it's in the air, it's in the glaciers in Antarctica, it's everywhere. And so it's really hard to avoid it. We're all exposed to it, regardless of no matter how careful we are if we eat all organic food and have a chemical-free home, we're still exposed to it. But we can mitigate the amount of exposure that we have. And a key way to do that is by considering bioaccumulation, which means that it's the way biological symptoms or plants and animals accumulate toxicity from the environment. If you think about a deer, if you think about a wild environment where, since we know that these chemicals are in the environment everywhere, we know that, they exist in the freshwater streams outside, and freshwater lakes and rivers and creeks, and it's in the grass. And so, if a deer goes out and eats the grass, he's going to get some exposure in every blade of grass he eats. But over a lifetime, all those blades of grass that have had some component of toxicity accumulate in his body. So if a hunter goes out and shoots that deer, even though he's a wild animal and he hasn't been exposed to the factory farming system and the whole pharmaceutical, that's another whole story. Just from the environmental toxins, that animal flesh is going to have a far higher level of toxic chemicals than plants do. Because the higher up the food chain, the more opportunity there is to accumulate those foods. There's a really interesting study that came out just last January about the Environmental Working Group did a study of toxic chemicals in freshwater lakes and in rivers throughout the United States. and they tested something like 500 samples throughout the United States. All but one of them had a dangerously high level of PFAS, which is a type of industrial chemical used to make things water repellent or fire retardant is one of the, and they're also in chemicals and a lot of components, but they're everywhere and they don't break down. They're forever chemicals, they say.
Oh.
So all but one of the 500 freshwater systems in the United States were involved. What was even more troubling than that is that they also tested the fish who lived in those freshwater systems, in the ponds and rivers. And the level of toxicity was so much higher in the fish. They said that if you ate one serving of the fish who was swimming in that lake, you would get as much PFAS chemical in that meal as if you drank the water for a month.
Oh my goodness.
So this is just one serving of fish has as much chemical in it as if you drink the water for a month. And that's because the fish is swimming in it and consuming that water every single day. And that's the bioaccumulation, exponentially higher levels. So that's a very long way around to come back to say, many of the diseases that we see in our dogs and our cats now could very well potentially be traced to carcinogens and hormonal disruptors and various bad impacts of these chemicals on our systems. And so if we understand that the higher up the food chain you eat, the more of that exposure, your toxic exposure you're going to have, a lot of those illnesses the risk of illness will be reduced, and so a lot of the disease may improve when we get rid of that toxic load, or when we reduce the toxic load as much as we can, which means in part reducing the amount of meat that they're eating.
Yes.
And we've seen it happen. We've seen it happen in animals who are sick who get better when we simply eliminate the meat from the diet.
Yes, I've heard you mention that, and you've talked to veterinarians who've told you about that as well, right? That they've seen health issues with dogs and cats. I mean, a lot of times it's really sad to see animals developing problems, animals that live with us, that they don't have in the wild. They're developing human, like the illnesses of civilization, right? Like diabetes or arthritis, etc.
Right.
And you've seen some of those clear up, right?
Oh yeah, I've seen dramatic changes in some of the animals I've worked with. When I first started teaching this to veterinarians, the idea of number one, feeding a fresh whole foods, and number two, reducing the amount of meat in the diet. A lot of the comments they had afterwards were saying, especially the old time vets who'd been doing this for 20, 30 years or more, they say, I've seen the incidence of cancer and degenerative illness increased dramatically in the time I've been practicing, and there's got to be some reason. And as they heard about this approach for the first time, they said, maybe this is it. And now, then a few years later, a little over a year ago, I was at a conference where there were a number of veterinarians who had done a presentation for a few years before, and who had been feeding this way for some time. And a number of them came up to me and say, this is how they recommend feeding, and they see dramatic improvements in it.
Wow.
I've seen it in clients myself. I was asked by a veterinarian to work with a client who had a Cane Corso dog. It's a wonderful group of people. He actually was a very much loved family member of a group of cloistered Carmelite nuns. And he's a big Cane Corso dog, but a sweet dog. But he had severe gastrointestinal problems for many, many years. Severe vomiting, severe diarrhea. He never had a normal stool. He would pass stool 5-6 times a day. Frequently had just couldn't eat because he was vomiting. He wasn't feeling well. Had been to the ER. Nobody could really find out anything wrong with him. All kinds of tests done, and they couldn't sort anything out. He had already been on a fresh food diet, but we switched him to a vegan diet, and the symptoms went away. His stool normalized, the vomiting stopped, and he was able to eat normally. It was just really dramatic, you know.
My goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. Another client who had an older dog who had been showing a lot of symptoms of age that we expect from aging, arthritis, um, just have muscle weakness, having trouble getting up and down the stairs. Her coat was getting dull. She was just starting to look like an older dog. And then she started to develop, the vet said she had early signs of kidney failure. And so his person called me and she wanted to try the vegan diet. And she had been feeding fresh food. And we did this, and she did much better. She started to her mobility improved. She was able to get up and down the stairs without a problem. Her coat got better. Um, her her kidney function improved. The lab tests came back clean, and I always got a kick out of it. Carlene told me that she had taken her Dakota was the dog's name. She lived in an area where she would go out and walk in the neighborhood, and she saw a neighbor she hadn't seen in a while, and she said, "Oh, you got a new puppy." And this was not a new puppy. This was Dakota. She was just doing a lot better. She was feeling better. Her energy was better, and she looked better. So it really does make
a new lease on life.
Yes, exactly.
That's interesting. I know that's how I felt when I started implementing what I learned from the documentary Forks Over Knives. I was starting to develop arthritis and all kinds of things, and I never went totally vegan. That's like my ultimate long-term goal,
Yeah.
but
it's a process.
Yeah, it's a process. Yeah, and you got to learn how to do it, right? It's so that you have everything covered when you're not used to it.
Yeah, and it's about mentally adapting too, and again,
right.
Our foods are our traditions, and when we find sustenance at a lot of different levels from eating foods that we're used to and that bring us back to
right.
Memories we care about.
Jan has generously provided for a free gift for you all, and we'll have a link here on the page where you can access that free gift to get started right away with some of the things that she's been talking about. And Jen, can you let us know and let the audience know where they should go to find out more about your work?
Sure. My website is at holisticaha.com. Holistic AHA stands for Holistic Animal Health and Advocacy, but you don't have to type that all out. Just holisticaha.com.
And remember to check out Jan's books. Her latest book is The Fresh and Flexible Meal Plan, the easiest, most nutritious way to feed your dog and cat. Her other books are The Complete Holistic Dog Book, Home Health Care for Our Canine Companions, and Listen to the Silence, Lessons from Trees and Other Masters.